My name is Selena, and I was 32. She used to call me the family disappointment. The day I finished painting her mansion, she leaned close and whispered, "You're lucky I pity you." I smiled, because I already knew the next time she said my name, it would be on national news, right under the headline about her downfall. I still remember the exact shade of the sky that morning, bleached gray like the color of cheap primer. I had a roller in one hand, a bucket of eggshell white in the other, and 1,000 unspoken words pressing behind my teeth. Aunt Mirabelle's mansion rose before me like a monument to everything I was supposed to envy. Gleaming windows, imported tiles, a driveway wide enough to fit my entire life twice over. She opened the door with her usual smirk, the one that could slice through confidence faster than a palette knife through canvas. "Selena," she said, drawing out my name as if tasting something sour. "You're early. At least punctuality doesn't cost money." I smiled. Years of swallowing pride had taught me to keep my face neutral. "Morning, Aunt Mirabelle. I figured I'd start before the sun gets too harsh." She looked me up and down, the paint-stained jeans, the frayed flannel, the old sneakers dotted with dried acrylic, and gave a soft chuckle. "Well, you certainly look the part. I do admire people who can find beauty in simple work." Inside, her home gleamed. Crystal chandeliers winked at me from the ceiling. Family portraits lined the hallway. Her husband before he passed, and my cousin Ivy in a white lace graduation dress. Not a single photo of my mother. I set up my ladder near the foyer. The walls were faded beige, a little cracked, nothing unfixable. As I spread the first stroke of fresh paint, the smell of turpentine and lemon polish mingled into something oddly comforting. Painting, no matter where or for whom, always steadied me. But I didn't miss the whispers behind me. Mirabelle's friends had come over for coffee. They perched on her velvet couches like jeweled birds, voices dripping sugar and poison. "Is that your niece, the one who paints those little landscapes?" Poor thing never did much with her art." "Well, at least she's handy around the house. Some people just aren't meant for ambition." Each sentence landed like a flick of a wet brush. Small, sharp, humiliating. I kept rolling the paint, stroke by steady stroke, pretending the walls absorbed their cruelty along with the primer. Mirabelle strutted through the living room, waving her manicured hand. "Don't mind them, Selena. They're just curious about your lifestyle choices." She laughed lightly. "At least you're handy with a brush." I forced a polite nod. "It pays the bills." Yes," she said, sipping her latte. "But wouldn't it be nicer to have someone paying you just to exist comfortably? Not everyone's meant to work with their hands." Her guests giggled. One of them asked, "Mirabelle, dear, how charitable of you to hire family." Mirabelle sighed dramatically. "Well, what's family for? I suppose it's good to give her something productive to do." I bit down on the inside of my cheek until I tasted iron. Around noon, Ivy appeared. Mirabelle's only daughter, glossy and perfumed. She pulled up in a convertible that cost more than my entire apartment building. "Oh my God, Selena," she said, stepping out in heels that clacked like judgment. "You're actually doing manual labor? That's kinda inspiring, in a sad girl way." "I'm painting, Ivy. It's what I do," I said, dipping my roller again. She leaned closer, pretending to examine the wall. "It's just weird seeing you, sweating and stuff. Anyway, Mom, I'm taking the Tesla to brunch. Need anything?" Mirabelle waved her off. "Be safe, darling." Then she turned to me. "You see? Ivy worked hard, too. She manages the boutique downtown now." I knew that boutique. I'd painted its mural for $50 when it first opened. As Ivy sped off, Mirabelle sighed. "Such a shame your mother never taught you to marry well. She was always chasing silly dreams instead of security." That one landed deeper than she knew. My mother, her younger sister, had died 2 years ago of heart failure, alone in a small apartment I now rented. The two of them hadn't spoken in over a decade. Something about inheritance money, old jealousy, wounds that never dried. In the quiet moments between coats, memories crept in. My mother's gentle laugh, her hands guiding mine over cheap watercolor paper, her words, "Art keeps your soul from rusting." She'd been right. Even now, surrounded by marble floors and designer cruelty, art kept me breathing. By the second day, my shoulders ached, but the walls glowed smooth and new. Mirabelle strutted through, inspecting my work as if she were a queen approving a servant's effort. Not bad. Maybe I'll recommend you to my friends, though you'll have to learn to look a bit more presentable if you want high-end clients. Thank you, Aunt Mirabelle, I said evenly. She tilted her head. Still no boyfriend? Or are you one of those women married to her passion? I laughed softly. Guess I'm taken then. She rolled her eyes. Pity. I could have introduced you to one of Harold's golf partners. He adores artsy types. Might have saved you from, well, she gestured vaguely at the paint buckets. This. Her cruelty had a rhythm, almost musical. I'd learned to listen to it without letting it bruise. Each insult became a beat in the background of my own resolve. That evening, as the sun melted into the manicured hedges outside, I climbed down the ladder to clean my brushes. Mirabelle stood near the doorway, wineglass in hand, watching me. The golden light caught the diamond on her ring, scattering reflections across the fresh white wall. She stepped closer, her heels silent on the carpet. I could smell her perfume, jasmine and control. You know, she murmured, swirling the wine, you're lucky I pity you. The words slid out like a whisper, but hit like a hammer. For a heartbeat, the whole house went still. I looked at her, really looked, at the powder smoothing her wrinkles, the glassy pride in her eyes, the loneliness she hid behind perfection. Then I smiled. I guess I am Aunt Mirabelle. I dipped my brush into the paint again, letting a single drop fall to the floor, her expensive rug. She didn't notice, and in that tiny, rebellious moment, something inside me shifted, quiet, steady, and irreversible. As I scraped the next strip of old paint, her voice brushed against my ear once more, softer, almost triumphant. You're lucky I pity you. I nodded slowly, my hand tightening on the scraper. She had no idea how lucky she was that I wasn't done yet. That whisper could have broken me, but instead it fueled something in me. I stood there, brush in hand, her words echoing in my skull like a cruel refrain. You're lucky I pity you. Most people would have felt shame, maybe anger, but what I felt was something sharper. Purpose. That night, when I returned to my small studio apartment, I dropped my paint-stained jeans in the corner and stared at the half-finished canvas leaning against the wall. A stormy landscape stretched across it, dark clouds, a single beam of sunlight cutting through. I picked up my palette knife, dragging streaks of gold through the gray. My pulse slowed. Painting was my rebellion, my quiet, defiant answer to every sneer, every insult, every time someone told me I wasn't enough. As I painted, memories of Mirabelle's voice danced around me like smoke. Your poor mother. She always believed you'd be special. Maybe you should try something stable, dear. A trade, perhaps. Not everyone can make a living out of scribbling. She'd always said those things sweetly, with a smile that disguised her venom. When my mother was still alive, she'd brush it off. Mirabelle's not cruel, sweetheart, she'd say, just insecure in her own way. But I'd seen the pain in her eyes after those family dinners. I remembered one in particular, 10 years ago, the last Christmas we'd all spent together. Mirabelle's house had been decked out like a winter magazine spread, gold ornaments, glittering candles, champagne flutes on every surface. I'd just graduated from art school, broke but hopeful, clutching a small portfolio. I'd offered to paint a family portrait for free. Mirabelle had laughed. Oh, Selena, she'd said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Sweetheart, if I wanted finger paintings, I'd ask my daughter's kindergarten class. The laughter that followed had stuck with me like a bruise that never faded. My mother had pulled me aside later that night, whispering, You'll show her someday. Just keep creating. Now, years later, that moment burned bright in my mind as I scrubbed her walls clean. By the third day, the rhythm of my work became something meditative. Dip, roll, sweep, breathe. Each stroke of paint seemed to peel another layer of anger off me, but it didn't erase it, it refined it. I didn't want to explode. I wanted to build. When Mirabelle hosted her bridge club that afternoon, I was still working in the hallway. Her laughter echoed down the marble corridors. Can you believe she's still doing that art thing? One of them asked. At least she's not out of work, another replied. Oh, Mirabelle, you're such a saint for hiring her. Family pity's a lost art. The sound of their laughter made my brush tremble for a second. I took a deep breath. forcing a smile onto my lips even though no one could see it. I'd learned the power of quiet endurance. Rage was exhausting. Patience was fuel. Later that evening, I called Tara. "Tell me you didn't deck her," she said as soon as she heard my voice. I laughed softly. Tempting, but no, I'm saving that energy. Tara had been my best friend since college, the kind of woman who could make courage contagious. "You're working on something bigger," she let her talk. "People like that always reveal themselves." "I know," I said. "It's just, she talks about my mother like she was a fool." "Then make her eat those words," Tara replied. "Quietly, elegantly, like you do with your art." After we hung up, I sat at my tiny desk and opened my laptop. The dashboard of my online art store flickered to life. My pseudonym, C. Rowan, glowed at the top of the screen. Sales, 327 pieces sold. Followers, 41,000. Messages, 12 unread. To the world, I wasn't Selena the house painter. I was C. Rowan, the mysterious artist whose moody, textured canvases had started showing up in modern galleries and design blogs. A month ago, an interior design firm from New York had reached out about commissioning 5 original paintings for a luxury hotel lobby. The contract had been the biggest I'd ever received, enough money to clear my debts and fund the community art program I'd been dreaming of. I hadn't told a soul. Not even Tara knew the full scope of it. I'd been waiting for the right moment to reveal that I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving, quietly, under Mirabelle's shadow. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, painting my aunt's walls, being pitied by the very woman who'd someday boast about owning my art, if she ever found out. The symmetry of it made me almost smile. The next morning, she called for me from the parlor. "Selena, dear, could you bring a cloth? Someone spilled coffee on the rug." Her tone wasn't a request, it was a command. I did as she asked, silently. When I entered, 4 of her bridge friends were already gathered. One of them raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you've brought help?" Mirabelle smirked. "Family duty. She's between things, you know." "Between what, exactly?" one woman asked. Mirabelle's answer came sharp and casual. "Between reality and fantasy, I suppose." Their laughter filled the room again, but this time it didn't sting. I'd stopped letting it. I just crouched, cleaned the rug, and noticed how they never looked at me, just through me, like I was part of the furniture. When I left the room, I caught my reflection in one of Mirabelle's expensive mirrors, hair tied up, specks of paint on my cheek, steady eyes. For the first time, I didn't see the failure she thought I was. I saw a woman gathering power one silent day at a time. By late afternoon, the house gleamed with new color. Mirabelle inspected the walls, hands on her hips. Not bad," she said. "I suppose you have some talent, after all." "Thank you," I replied evenly. "Still," she added, "you might consider a more practical career. You can't live off art." I wiped my brush clean. "You'd be surprised." That night, I sat in my truck, engine idling, the smell of paint lingering on my hands. The sunset bled red and gold through the windshield. My phone buzzed. A message notification glowed on the screen. From Dalton Interiors. Subject: "Congratulations. Body, your signed partnership contract is ready. Let's discuss your launch date." I stared at the words for a long moment, then laughed out loud, a sound full of relief and vindication. Mirabelle had spent the whole day mocking my labor, and somewhere across the country, people were ready to pay more for one of my paintings than her chandelier was worth. I smiled into the fading light, thumb hovering over the reply button. Tomorrow, I'd finish painting her house. Then I'd start painting my revenge. By day, I painted Mirabelle's walls. By night, I painted the kind of art that sold for 5 figures. The sun rose on another day of paint fumes, polished marble, and the sound of Mirabelle's heels clicking down the hallway like a metronome of disapproval. I showed up with my roller and my quiet resolve, but beneath the surface, another world waited, one she couldn't even imagine. To her, I was a woman with calloused hands and an unremarkable life. But when the day ended and I closed my studio door at home, the truth came alive in color. I slipped on my old apron, turned on the soft glow of my desk lamp, and stood before a fresh canvas. My alter ego stared back at me from the corner of every signature. C. Rowan. That name had started as a shield. I used it years ago to escape judgment and family gossip. Now it had become a brand. Galleries whispered it like a secret. Collectors chased it like a prize. C. Rowan's work carries emotional gravity, one critic had written in Art West Monthly. Another described my technique as gritty yet hauntingly refined. I'd smiled when I read that. They didn't know I'd painted half those pieces on second-hand canvases while juggling odd jobs and unpaid bills. Last winter, a small exhibit in Seattle had sold out in 2 days. Then came Chicago, then Denver. Each show had drawn more attention, more curiosity about the artist who never appeared in person. I liked it that way. The anonymity gave me power. People saw the art, not the painter's bank account or pedigree. And now there was something bigger on the horizon, a charity art gala for orphaned children. I'd been invited to headline it under my pseudonym, my proceeds funding art therapy programs. I'd been quietly saving for this for months, funneling sales into a foundation under the same name. Mr. Dalton, my gallery representative, had called just last night. "You're about to step into a new league, Selena," he'd said. "After this gala, your name, well, your pseudonym, is going to be everywhere. You've built something remarkable." I'd thanked him, keeping my tone professional, though inside my heart thudded with pride. "Still keeping the real name hidden?" he'd asked. "For now," I'd said. "Some truths deserve perfect timing." He chuckled. "Then make sure you're the one to set the clock." That phrase lingered in my mind as I painted Mirabelle's dining room the next morning. She stood near the window, talking on the phone, her voice dripping honey and arrogance. "Yes, we're sponsoring another charity event next month," she bragged. "Our club is partnering with that new art foundation, Rowan something. My friends and I are on the hosting committee." I nearly dropped my brush. Rowan, she had no idea. I leaned my head against the ladder, laughing silently. The universe had an impeccable sense of humor. The gala that was about to elevate my career, the event I'd spent months planning in secret, was being hosted by her social club. By noon, I was steady again, coasting on a private current of satisfaction. Mirabelle walked in wearing pearls and discontent. "You missed a spot near the trim," she said sharply, pointing at a section of the wall. "It's drying unevenly," I replied. "Once it settles, I'll even it out." She frowned. I suppose you'd know better." Then, almost as an afterthought, "Though I might want that wall repainted later, at no extra charge. It's not quite the tone I imagined." I wanted to tell her that tone was her problem, not the paint's. Instead, I smiled. "Of course, Aunt Mirabelle." She nodded, satisfied, and drifted off to her sitting room to sip her imported tea. Later that day, Ivy showed up again, her hair styled to perfection, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. "Still at it, huh?" she said as she stepped inside. "I told Mom she should have just hired professionals." "She did," I said quietly, rolling another layer of paint. She laughed, not catching the meaning. "You're funny. Anyway, you won't believe this. I finally bought my first real piece of art." "Oh?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Yeah, from this artist everyone's talking about, C. Rowan. Cost me a fortune, but totally worth it. I feel sophisticated now." My brush paused mid-stroke. I turned slightly, watching her pride beam through her ignorance. "Good choice," I said softly. "C. Rowan's work is very special." "I know, right? I can't wait to hang it in my bedroom. Maybe I'll even get invited to one of her exhibits someday." "You just might," I murmured, smiling behind the roller. Mirabelle called from the kitchen. "Ivy, don't bother your cousin. She's focused on her work." Then, with a dismissive tone that sliced right through the air, "Bless her, she tries so hard to make something of herself." "Mom," Ivy whispered loudly, "she's right there." Mirabelle lowered her voice, but not enough. "Oh, she knows I mean well. She's family. If we don't remind her of reality, who will?" I stood quietly, painting, my heart steady. I didn't need to defend myself anymore. The irony spoke louder than any words could. When they left the room, I took a deep breath and looked around the house. The pristine walls, the spotless chandeliers, the flawless exterior. Everything in this place screamed control, wealth, status, but it was hollow. Every inch of it. I thought of my own space, tiny, chaotic, full of half-finished canvases and the smell of turpentine. It was alive. After finishing for the day, I cleaned my brushes, my mind already drifting to the studio. That night, the city hummed outside my window as I opened my sketchbook. I started drafting the main piece for the gala, a painting called Inheritance. It would be a portrait, not of Mirabelle, but of everything she represented. Arrogance, pity, the illusion of perfection. But hidden within the shadows, I planned to include something softer, a hand reaching toward light, like my mother's had once guided mine. I worked until midnight, my eyes burning, my spirit electric. When I finally stepped back, I knew this piece would be the one that ended my anonymity. My phone buzzed on the table. I wiped my hands on my apron and glanced at the screen. From Elena, Charity Director. Subject, exciting news. Body, the upcoming art gala has been confirmed in your honor. Location, Crestview Social Club, Mirabelle's City. We can't wait to celebrate your incredible work. See Rowan. I let out a stunned laugh. The world had just folded in on itself. Mirabelle's club, Mirabelle's friends, Mirabelle's pride and joy. They were about to celebrate me. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding, the glow of my phone reflecting off wet paint. Fate wasn't subtle, but it sure knew how to set a stage. When I saw her name on the invitation list, I knew fate had just handed me. The email sat open on my laptop, glowing like a secret I could barely contain. Crestview Social Club, hosted by the Mirabelle Foundation Committee. I couldn't stop smiling. There it was, plain as day. Venue provided by Mirabelle Laurent and the Crestview Ladies' Circle. Of all the places in the world, fate had chosen hers. For a few minutes, I just sat there, watching the cursor blink beside my pseudonym, C. Rowan. My heart drummed with disbelief and amusement all at once. The same woman who had spent her life tearing me down was about to sponsor my biggest artistic triumph, and she wouldn't know a thing until it was far too late to hide behind her pearls and pity. The next morning, I arrived at her mansion early, as usual. The house looked even larger in the crisp light, all smooth walls and spotless perfection, just like her. I unloaded my brushes and rollers, hiding my smirk behind a yawn. She was already in the kitchen, talking on speakerphone. "Yes, I'll be attending the gala," she said proudly. "It's for a local artist, Rowan something. I hear she's quite the rising name. It'll be the event of the season." I froze at the doorway, biting the inside of my cheek to stop the laugh bubbling up. Her friend on the line cooed, "Oh, how wonderful, Mirabelle. You always know the right people." "I try," she replied, her tone dripping with satisfaction. "You know how I love to support the arts. Not everyone can appreciate fine talent." I leaned against the frame, amused by the sheer irony. "Need me to move the ladders, Aunt Mirabelle?" She waved her hand dismissively, still on the phone. Yes, yes, dear. Don't get paint on the carpet. It's custom Italian." As I climbed the ladder and rolled a coat of ivory across the high wall, I thought about the evening she was so proud of attending, the evening where her name would be printed right below mine, where her reputation for class would be wrapped around a secret she couldn't control. That thought carried me through the day. After work, I met Tara at the little cafe downtown. She was already waiting in the corner booth, her curly hair piled high, a sketchbook open beside her cappuccino. "I still can't believe it's her venue," she said after I told her everything. "That's some cosmic level irony." "I know," I said, stirring my coffee. "It feels like the universe is finally signing one of my paintings for me." Tara grinned. "So what's the plan? You're revealing your identity that night?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, it's time. I want my mom's story to mean something, to prove that grace survives cruelty." Her expression softened. "You've come a long way, See." I smiled. "And I'm not done yet." When I got home, I walked straight to my easel. The canvas waited under a sheet as if guarding my secret. I lifted the cloth, revealing the half-finished portrait of my mother. Her gentle eyes looked out from shades of muted blue and warm gold. It wasn't a perfect likeness, but the emotion was real, the quiet resilience that had carried us through lean years and unkind relatives. This would be my centerpiece at the gala, my tribute to her, my victory, painted in silence. Over the next week, I worked at Mirabelle's during the day and in my studio at night, my worlds colliding like oil and water. Mirabelle would hover around me with her critiques, while I quietly imagined her expression when she realized whose name she'd been bragging about all month. On Thursday, she stood behind me as I painted the last section of the stairwell. "Selena," she said, folding her arms, "don't you ever get tired of this?" I paused. "Of painting?" "No, dear, of scraping by. You're talented enough to teach art classes or something respectable." She adjusted her silk scarf. "You'll never fit in with people who matter if you don't, well, present yourself properly." Her words rolled off me like water off varnish. I smiled faintly. Maybe I'm exactly where I need to be. She blinked, taken aback by the calm in my tone, then waved her hand. "Suit yourself, but ambition without refinement is just a hobby." As she left, I watched her back, the perfect posture, the carefully measured steps, and thought, you have no idea how much refinement looks like revenge. That night, Tara came over to help me pack my finished pieces for shipping to the event. We wrapped each painting carefully, labeling them with simple tags. C. Rowan, untitled, 47, C. Rowan, Roots, C. Rowan, Inheritance. As Tara sealed the last crate, she said, "You realize she's probably going to be front row." "Oh, I'm counting on it," I said, sliding the final tag onto the box. We laughed until our sides hurt. The next morning, the invitations for the gala were sent out by the organizing committee. I knew Mirabelle's would arrive by hand. Her club's hierarchy made sure of that. By afternoon, I was back at her house, painting the last trim in the hallway. She was seated at the dining table, sipping tea, while her housekeeper sorted through her mail. "Another stack of invites, ma'am," the woman said, handing over a cream-colored envelope with gold lettering. Mirabelle took it, eyes scanning the calligraphy. "Ah, this must be for the gala." I pretended to keep painting, though my pulse quickened. I watched her reflection in the glass as she slit the envelope open with a gold letter opener. Her lips curved in satisfaction as she read. "Oh, how elegant," she murmured. "They even sent personalized notes from the artist herself." She tilted the card toward the light, admiring the embossed signature at the bottom. C. Rowan. "Such class," she whispered, unaware that the signature she was admiring came from the very hands now brushing paint across her wall. I had to bite back a smile. "What's it for again?" the housekeeper asked. "Oh, it's a charity art event," Mirabelle said, pride dripping from every syllable. "The artist's supposed to be the next big thing. Everyone who's anyone will be there." I rolled another streak of white across the wall, steady and smooth. "Sounds like quite the evening." "It will be," she replied. "Maybe I'll even get a chance to meet the artist myself." My hand didn't falter, but my voice came out calm, low, and sure. "Maybe you already have." She didn't catch the meaning. She never did. Later that night, as I locked up my supplies and stepped into the cool air, I pictured her face when she'd finally see that same signature. Not on a card, but on a check, on a painting, and on the wall of her own downfall. She held my invitation like it was gold, never realizing it came from the niece she pitied. The following week, Mirabelle's mansion buzzed with a kind of smug energy that only she could summon. She'd received her invitation to the gala, and it might as well have been a royal decree. Every guest who entered her orbit heard about it. By Tuesday morning, she'd called half the neighborhood. "Yes, darling, the Crestview Gala. VIP seating, of course. It's for that marvelous artist, C. Rowan. Supposedly impossible to get an invitation." She said my pseudonym like she owned it, the same way she claimed every conversation, every spotlight. I stood a few feet away on the ladder, brush in hand, quietly rolling color onto the crown molding and fighting to keep my grin buried. She had no idea she was bragging about me. Her friends came over that afternoon for coffee and gossip. I was finishing the dining room trim when I heard one of them gasp, "Mirabelle, you lucky thing. I tried to get tickets, but it's sold out. They say the artist is a mystery, some prodigy who never shows her face." Mirabelle preened, adjusting her pearl necklace. "Well, connections help. I've always believed in supporting culture, even if some of us aren't naturally artistic." She glanced at me as if punctuating the insult. "People like that don't mingle with laborers," another friend joked, nodding toward me. Mirabelle chuckled. "Oh, of course not. But still, I'll be there, front and center." The women laughed, and I kept painting, my roller whispering across the wall like a secret I refused to share just yet. Ivy arrived halfway through their chatter, her perfume trailing ahead of her like a declaration. "Mom, did you see the coverage on C. Rowan? She's everywhere. They say her new portrait's going to be the centerpiece of the gala." "Oh, darling, really?" Mirabelle said, pretending to be only mildly interested. "Yes. There's even speculation she might reveal her identity that night. Everyone's trying to guess who she is. Some people think she's European, others say she's from the South." I almost laughed out loud. From the South, all right, the south end of her street. Ivy plopped down on the sofa, scrolling through her phone. Her last piece, Roots, sold for 25 grand. Can. "Do you believe it?" "That's like a car." Mirabelle murmured, crossing her legs. "Talented people always attract attention, but real class, Ivy, isn't about money. It's about poise." "Still," Ivy said dreamily, "I'd die to meet her. Imagine having a C. Rowan original in our house." I dipped my roller again, whispering under my breath, "You already do." Later that day, I finished the final coat in the sitting room, the last room of the mansion. The afternoon light poured through the window, glinting off the golden frames of her portraits. My mother's absence among them stung less now. Soon, I'd give her a place the whole world could see. Mirabelle came to inspect my work. She circled slowly, tapping her chin, pretending to appraise. Acceptable, I suppose," she said at last, "though the lighting in this corner feels off. Perhaps you should redo that wall. No charge, of course." I looked up at her, keeping my voice even. "It's perfect as it is, Aunt Mirabelle. The shadows are from the drapes, not the paint." She frowned, clearly annoyed that I hadn't bowed. "Well, if you say so. Just don't expect a tip for attitude." I stepped down from the ladder and handed her an envelope. "This is my invoice for the work. Materials included." She opened it and blinked. "Oh my, you charge quite a bit for paint." "It's standard rate." She sighed dramatically, rifling through her purse. "I suppose I can spare this." She pulled out a check, short by $200, and handed it to me with a polished smile. "Family discount." I took it without hesitation, folding it neatly. "Thank you, Aunt Mirabelle," I said softly. "You'll pay me back another way." She didn't even hear it. She'd already turned back to her friends, gushing about her invitation again. That evening, I sat in my truck outside her house, the sun melting into orange behind the hedges. I stared at the underpaid check in my hand and couldn't help but laugh. She thought she'd shorted me. She had no idea she'd just bought a front row seat to her own undoing. The weeks leading up to the gala passed in a blur of anticipation and preparation. Every art publication, every social page seemed to mention C. Rowan. My inbox filled with interview requests, sponsorship offers, and collectors begging for previews. Newspapers printed headlines like, "The Mysterious C. Rowan, the artist who's redefining modern emotion charity gala to feature anonymous star, proceeds to benefit orphaned youths." The coverage grew louder, and with it, my secret felt heavier, but sweeter. Each night after finishing my painting shifts, I returned to my studio to make final adjustments to Inheritance, the portrait of my mother. It had become my masterpiece, layers of light and shadow blending into a quiet strength that seemed to breathe on the canvas. When I stood before it, I could almost hear her voice again. "Let your art speak. For you, Selena." Tara dropped by one evening to help pack up the paintings. She ran her fingers gently over the dried texture of Inheritance. "She's beautiful," she whispered. "You ready for this?" "Ready," I said, "more than ever." "Think she'll recognize herself in it?" I smiled faintly. I hope she recognizes what she threw away. As the gala drew closer, the buzz around C. Rowan reached a fever pitch. Influencers speculated online about who the artist might be. Some said a reclusive heiress. Others insisted it was a European art prodigy hiding from fame. I let them guess. The longer the world wondered, the more power the truth would have when it finally surfaced. 2 days before the event, an article appeared in the Crestview Gazette featuring Mirabelle herself. The headline read, "Local philanthropist Mirabelle Laurent to host prestigious charity gala for rising art icon." She was quoted saying, "I'm honored to lend my support to true talent. We must always uplift those with real potential." I nearly choked on my coffee when I read it. She had no idea how close true talent lived to her own front porch. By the night before the gala, everything was ready. My paintings had been shipped, the stage arranged, the guest list finalized. The only thing left was the reveal. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, half nervous, half euphoric. Tomorrow would end years of silence. Tomorrow, the same people who had laughed at me would applaud me. As dawn filtered through the blinds, I reached for my phone on the nightstand. A new email notification blinked at the top. From Mr. Dalton. Subject, confirmed for tonight. Body, your name reveal is confirmed. The press will be there. Let's make history, Selena. My heart skipped. I read it twice, then a third time. It was real. The day had finally come. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. By tonight, Mirabelle's perfect world would crack, and my signature would be the hammer. The lights, the champagne, the whispers, it was everything Mirabelle lived for. And this time, I was the main event. The night of the gala shimmered with the kind of elegance Mirabelle worshipped. Crestview's marble foyer gleamed beneath chandeliers that spilled golden light across the crowd. Waiters floated past with trays of champagne, and a soft hum of string instruments filled the air. It was a world built to flatter people like her. And for once, I wasn't on the outside looking in. I was the reason it existed tonight. I arrived just after 7. My gown was black silk, simple but commanding. My hair was swept into a low twist, a diamond pin glinting above my ear, the only jewelry I owned that wasn't thrifted, gifted to me by my mother years ago. As I stepped through the glass doors, a dozen faces turned. None recognized me. It was almost intoxicating. For the first time, I wasn't the struggling niece, the painter for hire. I was C. Rowan, the name on every guest's tongue. The ghost behind the art everyone wanted to see. Elena, the event's host and a well-known philanthropist, spotted me immediately. She swept toward me with her usual grace. Selena, she whispered, beaming, or should I say C. Rowan? You look radiant. Thank you, I murmured. Is everything ready? More than ready, she said, squeezing my hands. They're enchanted already, and they don't even know who you are yet. I glanced around the grand hall, my heart tightening when I saw a familiar figure in champagne silk. Mirabelle. Her posture perfect, her smile polished, surrounded by her social circle like a queen presiding over her court. Ivy stood beside her in a glittering blue gown, snapping selfies in front of the gallery banners that bore my pseudonym. I almost laughed at the sight. From across the room, I heard her voice carry, confident and bright. Oh, I've been such a supporter of the arts for years, she was telling a local reporter. When I heard Rowan was showing here, I insisted on offering our venue. Real art deserves real refinement, don't you think? I drifted among the crowd, staying just far enough to remain unseen. The walls were lined with my paintings, soft lights gliding over them like reverent hands. People stood before each piece, murmuring words that used to feel like unreachable dreams. It's breathtaking. Her texture work, it's almost alive. You can feel the story. Mirabelle's voice broke through again, slicing the air like a champagne cork. Now this is class, she said to her friends, gesturing toward my painting inheritance. You can tell it wasn't painted by an amateur. It has real substance, unlike some people's wall paint. Her friends tittered politely. I almost pitied her, standing inches from her own humiliation and basking in the glow of a name she didn't realize belonged to the woman she'd belittled all her life. Almost. Elena soon took the stage, her voice warm and commanding through the microphone. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this year's Crestview Charity Gala. Tonight we celebrate the power of art to heal, inspire, and unite. Applause rippled through the hall. I felt my pulse quicken. And of course, she continued, we are honored to feature the extraordinary works of an artist whose name has stirred hearts across the country, C. Rowan. A wave of excitement swept through the guests. Murmurs, flashes of cameras, the click of heels as people leaned closer to the stage. Mirabelle clapped daintily, eyes bright. Oh, how marvelous, she said to her table. I do hope she's as lovely as her art. Elena smiled at the audience. Before we begin the charity auction, I'd like to personally thank our venue sponsor, Mrs. Mirabelle Laurent, for her generosity and commitment to supporting the arts. A spotlight fell on Mirabelle's table. She sat straighter, placing a hand to her chest. "Oh, please," she said modestly, though her voice carried easily. "It's truly an honor." The applause grew louder. "Now," Elena said, "allow me to introduce our guest of honor, the artist herself. Tonight, for the very first time, C. Rowan will step into the light." The room hushed. Mirabelle leaned forward eagerly, whispering to Ivy, "This is the moment. I told you we'd be part of something grand." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years press and then lift from my chest. The host gestured toward me from backstage. My heels clicked softly against the polished floor as I approached the light. The applause began again, soft, uncertain at first, then swelling. I could feel their curiosity, their hunger for mystery. I paused at the foot of the stage, letting the glow of the spotlight wash over me. Elena smiled, her voice warm. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome C. Rowan." Gasps fluttered like silk as I stepped onto the stage. Cameras flashed. The lights were blinding, but I didn't need to see her to know where she was. I could feel Mirabelle's gaze latch onto me, curious, then confused. I stood before the microphone, my heart steady, my voice calm. "Good evening," I began. "Thank you for being here to support something close to my heart. Art has a way of telling the truth, even when the truth hides behind color and canvas." I looked out at the crowd, and then my eyes found her, Mirabelle, frozen mid-clap, confusion twisting into disbelief. Elena turned toward me, smiling. "Would you like to share a few words about your inspiration tonight?" I nodded slightly. "Every piece here was inspired by resilience," I said, letting my gaze linger on my aunt, "by the idea that beauty can come from struggle, and that even those dismissed as less can create something priceless." Whispers erupted among the tables. I could see Ivy's mouth fall open. One of Mirabelle's friends leaned in, whispering frantically, "Isn't that your niece?" Mirabelle blinked rapidly, her lipstick smile cracking. "No, that can't be." Elena handed me a glass award, engraved with C. Rowan, Artist of Honor. "Thank you, Selena," she said clearly into the mic, "for using your talent to change lives." The name hung in the air like thunder. Selena. The murmurs exploded into audible gasps. "Selena?" someone said near the front. "That's Mirabelle's niece." I turned my head and smiled directly at my aunt as the cameras flashed. Her glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the marble floor, the sound ringing through the hall like applause. She froze, clutching her champagne glass, as my name echoed across the room. For a moment, the entire ballroom stood still. The chandeliers shimmered above us, light bouncing off mirrored walls, but all eyes were on me and on Mirabelle. My name, Selena, hung heavy in the air like paint yet to dry. She sat motionless, her manicured fingers tight around the stem of her champagne glass, knuckles whitening as the crowd began to murmur. I watched her expression twist from disbelief to recognition, the mask of social grace slipping inch by inch. Elena, radiant and unaware of the personal storm unraveling, gestured to me with admiration. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said into the microphone, "this is the remarkable woman behind the art that's touched so many hearts, Selena Rowan." Rowan. My real last name, my mother's maiden name. The pseudonym that had made me a success now joined me with the family that had tried to erase us. Applause erupted around the room, a mix of awe and confusion. Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters whispered to one another, realizing the connection between the reclusive artist and the local woman Mirabelle had paraded around as her charity case. I looked down at her, my aunt, my tormentor, my accidental benefactor. Her jaw worked soundlessly as Ivy gaped beside her, her face pale beneath layers of foundation. That's impossible," I heard Mirabelle whisper. I stepped closer to the microphone, steadying my voice. "Thank you," I began, the word tasting sweeter than any victory I'd ever imagined. "I'm honored to be here tonight, not just as an artist, but as someone who learned that resilience is its own kind of art." The audience hushed again, the sound of crystal glasses setting down on tables filling the space. "I wasn't born into privilege," I continued. "In fact, for years, I painted in silence, at night, after long days of doing what I had to, not what I dreamed of. But I believe that art could still find its way into the light. even if the world didn't believe in the person holding the brush. I glanced toward Mirabelle's table, watching her squirm in her seat. Her friends leaned in close, whispering behind gloved hands. "I want to thank those who believed in me," I said slowly, "even when they didn't know who I was." The line landed like a well-aimed stroke of crimson across white canvas. Murmurs rippled through the guests. I saw one of Mirabelle's friends, the one who joked about laborers, raise her brows, realization dawning. At the edge of the crowd, Ivy stood frozen. Her lips parted slightly as she pulled out her phone. I watched her scroll through her photo gallery until she found the picture she'd once posted online, her C. Rowan original, the same painting she'd bragged about to me while I rolled paint on her mother's walls. Her eyes widened as understanding hit. "Oh my God," she mouthed silently. Mirabelle finally found her voice. "Well," she stammered loudly, forcing a smile, "what a delightful surprise. My niece has always been so talented. I, of course, knew she had potential." Her words came out brittle and false, cracking at the edges. A few guests glanced her way, unimpressed. She dabbed her forehead with a napkin, trying to maintain her composure under the weight of exposure. Elena, ever the gracious host, stepped beside me. "Selena's contributions tonight are extraordinary," she said, her voice rich with pride. "Every piece you see here was donated for auction, and all proceeds will go directly to the St. Rose Orphanage Fund." The room broke into applause again. I smiled, feeling my mother's presence beside me, steady and approving. "Art," I said softly into the microphone, "was something my mother taught me to love. She believed that dignity doesn't come from money, but from kindness. Tonight, I dedicate my favorite piece, this portrait." I gestured toward Inheritance, which hung behind me, bathed in warm light, "to the woman who taught me that lesson." A lump rose in my throat as the spotlight fell on the painting. Gasps echoed through the room. The portrait's subject wasn't my mother's face, not literally, but her essence. The woman in the painting stood in shadow, holding a lantern aloft, light spilling outward to illuminate unseen faces in the dark. "She always told me," I finished, "that no matter how others see you, you can choose to shine." The applause that followed was thunderous. Reporters surged closer, cameras clicking, flash after flash. Elena wrapped an arm around me, whispering, "You just made history." Mirabelle stood shakily, glass still in hand, the brittle smile frozen on her lips. "Darling," she said loudly, voice trembling, "come, let's have a picture together. Family should celebrate these things." A reporter turned toward her, pen poised. "Mrs. Laurent, how does it feel to discover your niece is the sea?" "Rowan?" She laughed awkwardly. "Oh, we're terribly proud, of course. I've always supported her work." Her friends exchanged glances, some frowning, some smirking. I could see the subtle shift happening, the way their smiles toward her began to cool, their distance widening by inches. "Mrs. Laurent," another journalist asked, "is it true your club sponsored this venue? That's quite a coincidence." Mirabelle blinked rapidly, her composure faltering. "Well, yes, of course. Philanthropy is very important to me." I met her gaze then, letting the silence stretch. "You've been very generous, Aunt Mirabelle," I said softly, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I couldn't have done this without your venue." A few chuckles rippled through the room. Her painted smile wavered again. The event carried on, but the social tide had turned. Guests gravitated toward me now, not her. People asked for photos, for signatures, for quotes about my inspiration. Each flash of a camera seemed to chip away at the facade she'd built all her life. When the auction began, Inheritance sold for more than double its starting price. Elena took the microphone once more. "All proceeds tonight go to charity," she announced, "and I'd like to personally thank our sponsors for their kindness." She beckoned me forward, handing me an envelope. "Selena, would you do the honors?" I smiled, stepping down the stage stairs toward Mirabelle's table. Her eyes flickered between curiosity and dread. "Mrs. Laurent," Elena said brightly, "thank you for your hospitality. We've prepared the official payment for your venue rental and catering, courtesy of tonight's benefactor." She held out the crisp white envelope. Mirabelle reached for it, hesitating when she saw the name printed neatly on the front, issued by Selina Rowan, benefactor and lead sponsor. Her hand trembled. I beg your pardon? Elena smiled, oblivious to the tension. Why, didn't you know? Ms. Rowan here personally funded the event. Mirabelle stared at me, face draining of color as whispers spread across the room. She opened the envelope with shaking fingers, her eyes locking on the signature at the bottom of the check. Selina Rowan. Her breath caught, her practiced smile collapsing completely as the cameras turned toward her. When she saw my name written in ink at the bottom of that check, her world tilted. For a heartbeat, I thought the room itself stopped breathing. Mirabelle's fingers clutched the white envelope as if it had turned to ice in her hand. She stared down at the check inside, the glossy paper trembling between her manicured nails. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her eyes flicked over the signature again. Selina Rowan. Once, twice, 3 times. Her face drained of color, leaving only the faint blush of expensive foundation. I saw the exact second the realization struck her, like a wall of glass shattering behind her eyes. She had not only hosted my event, she'd taken my money, my generosity, and stamped her name all over it, parading it as her own virtue. The crowd around us had fallen into a hush, sensing the strange energy pulsing between us. Then someone clapped, one hesitant, polite tap of hands that quickly grew into a round of applause, echoing through the grand ballroom. Elena, unaware of the personal history unfolding, smiled proudly. "Isn't it wonderful?" she said to the crowd. "Such generosity between family." I turned toward my aunt then, the woman who had once looked at me and said, "You're lucky I pity you." Now it was my turn to speak. "You were right, Aunt Mirabelle," I said softly, my voice steady, even as hers trembled. "I am lucky." Her eyes darted up to mine, wide and wet. "But not because you pitied me," I continued, letting each word fall like a deliberate stroke of paint. "I'm lucky because you taught me exactly what I never want to become." A murmur rippled through the guests. Cameras flashed. Phones rose discreetly in the air. I could see a reporter from the Crestview Gazette scribbling furiously. Mirabelle swallowed hard, trying to gather herself. "Selina, dear, this is all just a misunderstanding." Her voice quivered, her public smile twitching at the corners. "You should have told me. I would have supported you." I cut her off gently, not cruelly. "You did support me, in your own way." Her brow furrowed. "You gave me the reason to work harder. Every insult, every reminder that I wasn't enough, it built me, not broke me." Her mascara shimmered under the lights as she blinked rapidly. I didn't mean to?" I asked, my tone still calm. "You did. And that's all right. Because it reminded me that worth isn't something handed to you by people who think they have more. It's something you earn in silence, until the day the silence speaks louder than their laughter." The guests around us were riveted, eyes darting between us like spectators at a play. Ivy stood near the edge of the crowd, her hand pressed to her mouth. I saw tears gathering in her eyes, tears of shame, maybe realization. Reporters' cameras clicked like shutters in a storm. Each flash captured Mirabelle's painted facade, cracking further. Her polished calm was gone, replaced by something raw, fear, embarrassment, regret. "Selina," she said again, her voice breaking, "please, let's not make a scene." I smiled faintly. "Oh, Aunt Mirabelle, the scene was yours long before tonight. I'm just standing in the light now." More applause, soft but growing. A murmur of approval swept through the audience. People weren't laughing. They were moved. And in that moment, the pity she had once weaponized became mine to give. Elena stepped closer, her hand on my shoulder. "Selina, what you've done tonight is incredible," she said, turning toward the crowd. "Not only is her art breathtaking, but her generosity has already changed lives. The entire event, venue, catering, every expense was funded by this remarkable woman." Gasps filled the room. Mirabelle's lips parted again, the horror dawning fully. What?" I nodded politely. It seemed fitting, considering where it's held. Whispers swelled like waves. "She paid for everything? Mirabelle didn't sponsor this? Oh, that's awkward." Mirabelle's friends began to shift away, their smiles shrinking into uneasy expressions. One of them patted her shoulder, murmuring something that sounded like, "I had no idea," before retreating toward the buffet table. Another avoided her gaze entirely. Her kingdom of admiration was dissolving in real time. I took a step closer to her, lowering my voice. "You once told me I was lucky you pitied me. But you see, Aunt Mirabelle, pity has an expiration date." Tears welled in her eyes. "Selina, please." I shook my head gently. "No need. I forgave you long before this moment. I just wanted you to see what that forgiveness looks like." She looked at the check again, the ink of my signature gleaming under the lights. "You funded all of this?" she whispered hoarsely. "I did," I said. "In your name. So that, every time someone remembers this night, they'll remember it as the charity gala hosted by Mirabelle Laurent, sponsored by the woman she once pitied." Her lips trembled. "You made me look like a fool." "No," I said softly. "You did that on your own." The final applause rose like thunder. I turned back toward the audience, smiling, lifting my glass. "To new beginnings, and to the power of grace," I said. People stood. They clinked glasses. They cheered. It was no longer about revenge. It had become something bigger. A story about transformation, about earning back dignity, without ever stooping to cruelty. Mirabelle, however, could not stand the spotlight anymore. Her composure crumbled completely. She muttered something incoherent, then turned sharply, her heels clicking against the marble as she fled the room. Her exit was quiet, but the whispers that followed her were not. "Did you see her face?" "She must be mortified." "Imagine all that arrogance." I didn't watch her leave. I simply looked back at Inheritance, my mother's portrait glowing softly beneath the lights. The lantern in the painting seemed brighter than ever. Elena hugged me from the side. "You handled that with more grace than most could muster," she whispered. I exhaled slowly, feeling years of bitterness lift off my shoulders. "I didn't need to destroy her," I said. "I just needed to finish the picture." The rest of the evening flowed around me like a dream. Auction bids climbing higher, guests congratulating me, journalists asking for interviews. But I was somewhere else entirely, lost in quiet peace. Later, as the hall emptied and the music softened, Ivy approached me hesitantly. "Selina," she said, voice low. "I didn't know. I know," I said gently. "Now you do." She nodded, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Your mom would be proud." That was the moment that undid me. I smiled through the sting in my chest. "Yeah," I whispered. "I think she." The next morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. Headlines flooded every screen. From pity to power, artist's stunning reveal, shock society gala. C. Rowan exposed as local painter. Family drama unfolds at Crestview. The painter's revenge, how Selina Rowan redefined grace. I set my phone down, took a long sip of coffee, and smiled. The story had gone viral, but for the first time, I didn't care who was talking, because I finally had the last word. When she saw my name written in ink at the bottom of that check, her world tilted. For a few endless seconds, the ballroom seemed to hold its breath. The only sound was the soft tremor of paper in Mirabelle's hands. The check she'd just received, a simple rectangle of white, might as well have been a mirror, because the reflection it showed her was one she'd never seen before. Her fingers trembled as she read my name again. Selina Rowan, printed in the bottom corner. Signed across the line in looping, confident ink. She blinked once, twice, as though her eyes were lying to her. "Selina." "Rowan?" she whispered. The name caught in her throat. No, this can't be right. But it was. Elena, still smiling and oblivious to the undertow between us, said cheerfully into the microphone, "Yes, the entire event was sponsored by Ms. Rowan herself. Isn't that wonderful?" Applause broke out around the room, but the sound was muted compared to the pulse thundering in my chest. All the laughter, all the pity, all the years of her measuring my worth against her own had come down to this moment. Mirabelle stared at the check as if it burned. "You funded this?" she managed, her voice thin. I smiled. Every last detail. The venue, the decor, the catering, everything. I thought it was only fitting that your name be listed as host. After all, this event wouldn't have been possible without you." She blinked rapidly, confusion and humiliation flickering like candlelight across her face. Why would you do that?" "Because you once told me I was lucky you pitied me," I said evenly. "You were right, Aunt Mirabelle. I am lucky, but not because of your pity. I'm lucky because you taught me exactly what I never want to become." Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Around us, guests had gone utterly still, eyes darting between us as though afraid to interrupt the theater unfolding before them. Elena's smile faltered slightly as she glanced between us, sensing the tension. "Ah, what a touching family story," she said softly, attempting to move on. But it was too late. The air in the room had shifted. Everyone could feel it. Mirabelle's painted lips quivered into a brittle smile. "Darling, you misunderstand. I've always believed in you. This is just such a surprise." Her laugh came out too loud, forced. "Really, I'm so proud." "Are you?" I asked quietly, stepping closer so only she and the few nearest tables could hear. "Proud of me now that I'm worth something to you?" A ripple of murmurs spread. Phones were raised discreetly, flashes winking through the crowd. She faltered, her voice trembling. "Selena, please, not here. Let's talk privately." I shook my head. "We've had years of private conversations, Aunt Mirabelle. Every time you told me I was a disappointment, that my art was a waste, that I'd never fit in. You spoke your truth in public. Tonight, I'll speak mine." The color drained from her cheeks. "I don't hate you," I continued, my tone soft but sharp enough to cut glass. "You taught me something no teacher ever could. You showed me how cruelty dresses itself up as concern, how pride disguises itself as pity." Her hand went to her chest. "Selena, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I said, but without anger. "And that's okay. You made me strong enough to never need your approval again." A hush fell so deep you could hear the faint buzz of the lights above us. Then, somewhere near the back of the room, someone began to clap. Slowly, then another joined, and another. Within seconds, applause swelled like a tide, echoing through the hall. Mirabelle stood frozen amid the sound, her expression cracking piece by piece. Reporters angled for better shots, lenses flashing like strobe lights. I knew the photos would be everywhere by morning. The powerful socialite caught in the glare of poetic justice. She turned toward me, tears welling. "You've embarrassed me," she whispered, trembling. I met her eyes, steady and calm. "No, Aunt Mirabelle. You embarrassed yourself. I just finished the painting you started." She flinched as though struck. I could almost see the moment pride gave way to something fragile. Regret, maybe even shame. But I didn't need her apology anymore. My peace didn't depend on her recognition. The applause continued as Elena approached again, smiling uncertainly, but trying to salvage the moment. "Everyone, let's raise a glass to generosity, to art, and to family that inspires us." People obeyed, some still whispering, others stealing glances at Mirabelle's trembling form. I lifted my champagne flute with a small, peaceful smile. "To family," I echoed. She lowered her eyes. Cameras flashed again. Somewhere near the stage, a reporter's voice carried through the din. "Ms. Rowan, how does it feel, sharing this moment with your aunt?" I turned slightly toward the voice. "It feels right," I said simply, "because every masterpiece needs contrast. She was my shadow. She helped me find the light." The words seemed to hang in the air long after I finished speaking. Mirabelle looked as though she might collapse. She muttered something incoherent, then gathered the hem of her gown and turned sharply toward the exit. The crowd parted around her like a curtain. The sound of her heels against marble echoed through the silence she left behind. "Is she crying?" someone whispered. "Can you blame her?" another replied. Well, she had it coming. I didn't look back. My gaze stayed fixed on Inheritance, the portrait of my mother, still glowing on the stage under soft golden light. Elena placed a hand on my shoulder. "You handled that with grace," she murmured. "I wasn't painting revenge," I said. "I was painting closure." Her eyes softened. "And you framed it beautifully." The rest of the evening blurred into a haze of congratulations, interviews, and laughter. Guests approached me with admiration in their voices, not pity. For once, people didn't see the struggling niece. They saw the woman who had turned pain into art. Hours later, when the last glass of champagne had been poured and the lights dimmed, I walked out into the cool night air. My reflection shimmered faintly in the venue's glass doors. I didn't look like the woman Mirabelle had pitied. I looked like someone reborn. Slipped into my truck, kicked off my heels, and exhaled a breath I felt I'd been holding for years. The next morning, I woke to my phone buzzing nonstop. Notifications flooded the screen. Messages, calls, headlines. Artist's family feud shocks high society gala. See Rowan revealed, the pity she painted into power. You're lucky I pity you. How one artist turned humiliation into masterpiece. I stared at the screen, half laughing, half in disbelief. My story had gone viral overnight. And for once, I didn't feel small beneath the weight of the world's eyes, because I'd painted my truth, and the world finally saw the whole picture. They called it the painter's revenge, but to me, it was closure. The headlines came like a flood, each one louder than the last, each one trying to define what had happened in that ballroom. The painter's revenge. The niece who outsmarted high society. From pity to power. Artist exposes aunt's cruelty in viral gala moment. See Rowan unmasked. A story of dignity, art, and justice. They called it revenge. They said I'd humiliated a woman who once looked down on me. They analyzed my every expression, my tone, my restraint. But as I sat in my small studio days later, reading it all, I couldn't help but smile softly. It wasn't revenge, not really, it was release. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to prove anything. I had already said everything I needed to through my art, through the silence that came before the storm. The world had filled in the rest. Requests for interviews poured in. Galleries that once ignored my submissions now begged to feature my work. TV producers called my agent. Journalists sent endless questions. I said no to almost all of them. Fame wasn't the part I'd been chasing. What I wanted had already happened. The weight I'd carried since my mother's death was finally gone. Still, I couldn't deny that life had changed. My name, my real name, was finally respected. People weren't whispering about poor Selena anymore. They were quoting me, collecting my art, writing think pieces about empowerment and grace. But none of that compared to the message I got one quiet Sunday morning. It was from Ivy. Hey, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I saw everything. I'm sorry. For the jokes, for the way Mom and I treated you. You didn't deserve that. If you ever start that art program you talked about, I'd love to help. I stared at her message for a long moment, then typed back. It's already in progress. Come by on Monday. Bring paint clothes. She did. When she showed up, she was barely recognizable. Not the polished girl in pearls, but a woman in jeans and a ponytail, her face scrubbed free of pretense. She helped me unload boxes of brushes, canvases, and easels into the old community center I'd rented downtown. The name was already painted in blue letters across the door. The Rowan Art House for Creative Hearts. It wasn't just a studio, it was a school, a place for kids who couldn't afford art classes, for teenagers who needed an outlet instead of judgment. Inside, sunlight streamed through dusty windows, glinting off jars of paint and mismatched chairs, the smell of turpentine mixed with hope. Ivy stood beside me, her voice soft. It's beautiful, Selena. Your mom would have loved this. I smiled, adjusting a frame on the wall. She's here in every corner of it. We spent the day painting murals, bright, imperfect shapes splashing across the once blank walls. By evening, my hands were speckled with color again, but for the first time, the mess felt like a crown. That night, after Ivy left, I stood alone in the empty hall. The hum of the city filtered through the cracked windows, and for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. The whispers about Mirabelle had reached me, of course. She'd sold her mansion quietly a few months after the gala. Word was, most of her so-called friends had stopped calling. The country club that once adored her replaced her on their charity board without ceremony. She hadn't reached out to me. I hadn't expected her to. But sometimes, when I thought about her, I didn't feel anger. Just pity. The real kind. Not the cruel version she used to wield like a weapon. Because losing everything that made her feel powerful might have been the only way she'd ever see the truth. I didn't need to see her crumble to know I'd won. The victory was in my calm. in the freedom of not needing her validation anymore. In the months that followed, the Rowan Art House grew. Local businesses donated supplies. Volunteers came to teach classes, sculpture, watercolor, photography. I even caught Ivy one afternoon, kneeling beside a little girl, teaching her how to blend colors gently instead of smearing them. It made me smile. The cycle had finally broken. On the anniversary of the gala, I decided to paint one final piece, a quiet goodbye to the chapter that had defined me for so long. I cleared my studio, set up a blank canvas, and mixed shades of silver, blue, and ivory. The title came to me before the first brushstroke, Pity's Price. For days, I worked in silence. No music, no distractions, just me, the brush, and the ghosts of everything I'd overcome. When it was done, I stepped back and took it in. The painting showed a cracked mirror hanging in a dim room. Through the fractured glass, a woman's reflection smiled, calm, steady, unashamed. The shards around her caught the light, turning brokenness into beauty. It was the story of my life in color and line, the girl who'd been pitied, belittled, underestimated, until she'd realized the cracks weren't flaws. They were proof she'd survived. I hung it in my studio above my desk, next to my mother's old watercolor brushes. It felt right. The perfect full stop at the end of a long, turbulent sentence. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the children's laughter faded down the hall, I sat on the floor beneath that painting with a cup of coffee in hand. The walls glowed faintly with the warm colors of twilight, and I thought of everything that had led me here. The paint-stained hands, the debt, the cruel words, the whispers, the humiliation. I didn't resent any of it anymore. Every insult had been a brushstroke, every hardship, a layer of color. Together, they'd made the masterpiece that was my life now. I'd once believed revenge would feel sharp and satisfying, but standing here now, surrounded by light and laughter, I realized the sweetest victory was peace. I thought of Mirabelle again, not with bitterness, but with a quiet wish. I hoped she'd find her own version of this peace someday, away from the mirrors and masks. I reached for a pen and signed the corner of Pity's Price with deliberate, graceful strokes. Selena Rowan. I stared at my signature for a long time, remembering the day she'd seen it on that check. The shock, the disbelief. And then softly, I laughed. I'd painted my pain, my dignity, and my redemption. And now, for the first time, I didn't need to keep painting to prove who I was. I set the brush down on the table and whispered into the quiet, "You were wrong, Aunt Mirabelle. Pity isn't luck, it's blindness. And I can see perfectly now." Outside, the streetlights flickered on. I rose, turned off the lamp, and took one last look at the painting before leaving for the night. The woman in the cracked mirror seemed to smile wider in the dark. She pitied me once. Now I paint my own destiny, and sign it proudly. In the end, revenge wasn't about proving her wrong. It was about proving my peace was never hers to give. The woman who once pitied me lost everything built on pride, while I built something lasting from humility. My art no longer came from pain, but from freedom. Sometimes life doesn't shout when it delivers justice. It just signs your name at the bottom of the check. She pitied me once. Now I paint my own destiny and sign it proudly. If this story touched something inside you, take a moment to share it. Someone out there might need this reminder too. And if you believe that quiet dignity is the strongest form of revenge, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more true stories like mine. But tell me one thing. If someone once pitied you, and years later you had the power to humble them in front of everyone, would you forgive them, or let them feel what you once felt?